How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good friend, my co-host from the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing, man?
Doing well today, Jack. Really stoked to be able to get into it with you. I feel like we're just in the thralls of winter. It seems like Christmas season's here, football season, the cold. We've had a number of snow games.
Mm-hmm.
First year of the new 12-team college football playoff. It's right here. We're on the precipice of that. So much fun stuff to get into here. So stoked to be back with you. How are you doing, Jack?
Yeah, doing well, doing well. It's a good day, like you said. As of recording this, we are exactly a week away from Christmas. And so like you said, lots of football stuff going on. College football playoff first round is this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, we're down to the witching hour of the NFL season as opposed to the witching hour of NFL Red Zone. But we're there. We've got a lot of interesting stuff going on, especially with the NFC playoff picture. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks. But today we're going to talk about quarterbacks, and we're not going to talk about quarterbacks like, oh, these are teams that need to be looking for a new quarterback, or stuff like that. But we're going to be talking about just sort of this concept that has been going on throughout the NFL for years and years and years, but especially lately it's been happening a lot, which is teams bringing in another team's franchise quarterback after that team is like, you know what, we're moving on, we're getting younger, whatever it is. And just sort of looking at it and talking about it from the perspective of like, is this working? Should teams still be doing this? So we're going to start by talking about Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins was benched after this last week's game in which they beat the Raiders 15-9.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good football game. Not the type of game or performance that you're looking out of a team and the Falcons that we all thought were surefire going to win the NFC South this year, and thought maybe the Falcons could win a game or two in the playoffs and be sneaky. And right now they're in a barn burner with the Bucks for the NFC South crown. And so, Nick, sort of, what are your initial thoughts here about Kirk Cousins getting benched and Michael Penix Jr. being the starter going forward?
I feel like for me, Kirk Cousins, like, it just seems like he doesn't have the juice anymore. And when I say juice, I'm just talking about the athleticism in terms of like, he's never been an athletic move around kind of guy, but
Right.
just the ability to step up and deliver strikes in the pocket. I believe it was 2-3 weeks ago, the Chargers game, that he threw 4 interceptions. Obviously, a terrible game.
Yeah.
But the game clinching interception that I believe was a pick six before the game clinching interception. He threw an interception on probably a 10-yard out route. And this particular throw has been analyzed by people throughout the last couple of weeks. And it just looked like there wasn't very much velocity on it. It seemed to get there slow float. And like there have just been a lot of commentary surrounding that game in Kirk that like his velocity isn't there. He just doesn't have any strength behind his throws. And it seemed like that's kind of what the eye test looked like for him. It seems like his lack of mobility combined with his lack of arm strength, it feels like he can make the right decision in terms of like throw it to the open guy in the 5 to 10 yard range. But it doesn't seem like he has the ability to make difference making throws, which is a huge problem. That is a huge problem, especially when you're looking at Atlanta paying him a ton of money.
Yeah.
They had 90 million guaranteed tied up in him, I believe, when he was signed.
I think
And
so.
to not even make it one full year now at this point, there are still 3 games left for the Falcons, and he's not going to be starting them.
Right.
That is just it's just kind of insane to be like, okay, you invested that much in a quarterback, and in his first year with you, you're moving on to a rookie. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts with this, Jack? I feel like there are so many different directions to take it here.
Yeah, the thing that I keep thinking about is, would the Falcons do this if they hadn't drafted Michael Penix Jr. with a top 10 pick last year? Like, let's say their backup quarterback is Kurt Heineke, or Desmond Ridder, right? A couple guys that have been there in that quarterback room these last few years. Are they that quick to just be like, no, like Kirk, we're done with you? I think the answer is no. Not just because those guys are not as talented as Michael Penix Jr., but also just because, like, then you're thinking sort of what the Falcons did by drafting Michael Penix Jr. is they're like, we have put a lot of stock in Kirk Cousins with all of the money that we spent. And we have Michael Penix Jr., who we put a lot of stock in by drafting him number, was it 8 or 9? 8 or 9 overall.
Yeah.
8. We drafted him number 8 overall when, there were other guys on the board that we could have gotten, could have used. And because of that, in some ways it's like, well, either decision you make, makes sense because you put that much stock in that quarterback, but also then you're setting yourself up for failure when it's like, we all knew that the media was going to start asking the conversation, is it time to bench Kirk Cousins? Like, as soon as Michael Penix Jr. got drafted, it's like, okay, how many games do they let Kirk Cousins go before they decide to make that switch? And not only is that what we're experiencing right now, but like, technically, if Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr. stay all the way through Kirk Cousins' current contract, then at the end of that season, Kirk Cousins become a free agent, and Michael Penix Jr., they're picking up his 5th-year option. Like, it's one of those things that it just makes me – I just stop and think back to draft night and how shocked we were that the Falcons took Michael Penix Jr. And, like, if it works out with him, then that'll be great, and maybe it will mask some of the just, like, absolute – idiocracy that was signing Kirk Cousins to a deal like this. But yeah, I mean, Kirk definitely doesn't have the juice. I think he benefited a lot from what he had around him in Minnesota. And I think we're sort of seeing that now. He had an experienced offense. He had a really good offensive minded head coach. Whereas in Atlanta, like he's like the only veteran on that offensive side of the ball, really, when you look at it. So he's the one that's the leader. It feels very similar to Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets, where it's like, okay, well, actually, I need to be like leading and teaching these guys. And I thought I was just kind of getting slotted in to just do my thing, and it was all going to work out. Again, I also definitely think Cousins does not feel confident on his Achilles after tearing it last year. It's gotten better, sure. Like that first game that the Steelers played, like, it was bad. It was really, really bad. Like, he basically was like literally standing still in the pocket. So it has improved. But yeah, I think that this is just like, I think because of Michael Penix Jr., if that works out, we're not going to talk about this the same way we talked about the Broncos getting Russell Wilson. But if you just look at it, it's just as bad, the end result with all of this.
I hear you. There's one other little shot that I want to take in that, like, Kirk Cousins looked bad. Desmond Ridder, who he played against, who the Falcons traded away, Desmond Ridder's not an NFL player. Like, this dude should not be in the league. This dude, oh my gosh, Desmond Ridder's really bad. Watching him, I was like, oh, he just can't complete passes. He doesn't have the juice, the ability, the arm, but he can't even complete the passes. He can't deliver the football on the easy stuff really much at all. And so that was a 3rd-round pick wasted. And the Steelers, obviously, the Kenny Pickett pick was –
it was a bad quarterback draft.
It was a terrible quarterback draft.
Malik Willis is the best quarterback taken in that draft, and he is the backup in Green Bay. Like,
no, Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant in that
draft.
Right. Malik Willis, we like Malik Willis. There was also Sam Howell in that draft. Sam Howell can play a little bit. He played for Washington last year, and like, he was interesting. He was
I think if Sam Howell was playing for this Washington, he'd look a lot better than he did last year.
I think he's a good Faker Mayfield. Like, to me, he has those kind of vibes to me. But I think Sam Howell might be the second best quarterback from that draft too. I'm like, okay, Purdy, Howell's like not bad. Malik Willis has turned out to be okay as well, but obviously a disaster class. But anyway, I just wanted to throw a little bit of Ritter slander on there because, like, although Kirk is bad and they invested way too much money in him, like, Ritter can't play.
Yeah.
Also, though, I think the main separator between like Russell Wilson on the Broncos and how much money they invested in him compared to Kirk, they also traded away an insane amount of assets too, as far as trade assets. And so that's what I think. I think really the two worst trades are obviously Russ and Deshaun. I think those are by far the worst trades in modern NFL history as far as like post 2000. But I think as far as signings, like this Kirk signing is a disaster as far as a QB signing, 100%.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. You just, you look back at the Falcons, and I saw, I think a Falcons fan I saw post this sort of talking about just like, listen, we were spoiled having Matt Ryan for as long as we did, and thinking, seeing what that was. But if you look, since he left in 2021, in 22, it was Mariota and Desmond Ritter.
Oh.
In 23, it was Desmond Ritter and Taylor Heineke, and now in 24, it's going to be Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr. So not even like, I mean, obviously you could be like, well, you haven't had a good quarterback since you lost Matt Ryan. You haven't had a quarterback play every game in the season since Matt Ryan. Like, that's not good. And Matt Ryan towards the end, it was not good. The 2016 season was great, and it just sort of fell off from there. In 2017, they went 10-6. In 2018, 7-9. In 2019, they went 7-9. In 2020, they went 4-12. In 21, they went 7-10. And so it's just sort of been a slow decline there. But yeah, I mean, this is what we're seeing with Atlanta. It's what we saw with New England until they got Drake May, right? Like you have that guy for that long, and then you lose him, you move on, right? And it's like, what do we do now? The Colts, Peyton Manning, it was great. They got Andrew Luck, which served them well until he retired early, and since then it's been bad. There are quite a few examples of this. The Broncos are another example until now with Bo Nix, so it appears, right? After they lost Peyton Manning, and so it's just there's I think we take for granted how hard it is to get a top tier starting quarterback in the NFL, because like really the top 20 to 24 quarterbacks in the world are starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and the other 8 teams that don't have one of those sort of hodgepodge their way through it until they find one that they like. Like I wouldn't tell you that the Raiders have actually a top quarterback in the NFL, right? I wouldn't tell you that the Browns right now actually have a top quarterback in the NFL, and so on. And so I think we're just the Falcons are just kind of running into that, and they thought, like, hey, we had a couple of years of turmoil, but we figured it out, and we went and got Kirk Cousins. We went and tampered to get Kirk Cousins, and in reality, it's not working. So, Nick, how do you think Michael Penix Jr. is going to fare here at the end of the season? Do you think we're going to see significant rookie slump? Do you think, or not slump, but rookie just having to get used to the NFL game? Do you think that they're going to be able to make a good push here for the end of the season and push into the playoffs with him? Sort of, what are your thoughts with him stepping into this new role?
So I actually like the landing for Michael Penix as far as how he could show at the end of the season here. These next 3 weeks, they have 2 bottom feeders and 1 potential playoff team that could be a very interesting game depending on what Penix turns out to be. Mm-hmm. But next week or this week is against the Giants at home. Right. I think that Michael Penix could easily show some really good stuff against this Giants team. I feel like the Giants, Dexter Lawrence is really good. I believe he's injured right now, and Brian Burns is good. but the Falcons' O line's pretty dang good too, and their backfield area, like I think you can definitely do some things throwing the ball down the field. I think Mooney and London and Pitts, like I think you definitely have the ability to show some offensive pop there. They
Mm-hmm.
also have the Commanders in DC, and then they have the Panthers at home to end the year. I think there's really some potential that, like, if you get if Michael Penix shows some major flashes, I think you could beat Washington and be right in it for the NFC South. Like, I think it's really on the table.
Yeah.
I don't. I think that at the very least, there should definitely be flashes here. I think Michael Penix has the ability to throw the ball down the field. We saw him do that at Washington with Kalen DeBoer. I think he has the ability to play in a vertical passing game where he had three receivers who were all studs at Washington. And I think he had to throw so many vertical routes with so much air under them, throwing with leverage against defenders that really knew what they were doing, especially playing against like Oregon twice last year, for example. I just feel like theoretically Michael Penix should have the tangibles as far as mobility, arm strength, know-how, along with I think he has some really good weapons here too, where if he doesn't show flashes, that will be a really big problem for me. If
Mm-hmm.
against this slate of these next three teams to wrap up the year, if he doesn't show much of anything, if his throws don't have a lot of zip, if he is running around like a chicken with his head cut off and it's a disaster, that's a big problem for me.
Yep.
But I think it's probably more, I think the likely outcome is probably 50-60% he shows like flashes and looks pretty good. I think there's maybe 10 to 20% he shows a lot of flashes and looks really good. And
Yeah.
then I think there's probably a 10-15% chance, maybe 20% that like maybe 10% that like this could get ugly. But I doubt it. There's a reason
Yeah.
it's only about 10% probably in my mind. Where I
Yeah.
think with the weapons and the schedule and it being so late in the season, where it's not like his first start is he doesn't have his legs under him at all. He doesn't have any NFL experience watching from the sideline what a game looks like or preparing for a game. He could be rusty this first game, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's very likely it's more middle ground to me. And I really like Michael Penix, the player. I think that his tangibles should allow him to really be able to settle into the game. If we see a really mobile Michael Penix, we didn't see that a lot at Washington due to his ACL injuries that he had in college, especially at Indiana. But I feel like if you see Michael Penix running around being mobile, like we know from his 40-yard dash, he can move.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see it when you look back, especially at Indiana. He can move around a lot, but at Washington, he didn't do that. And I really don't know what Raheem Morris is going to allow him to do being a
Sure.
rookie in his first game in these last three games of the season. But I'm excited. I think that him playing against the Giants, if it was Kirk Cousins versus the Giants, I would have no reason to watch that game. But Michael Penix versus the Giants, I have a reason to watch the game, you know?
Yeah. I think the thing that's really interesting, sort of moving from, the Penix aspect of it to just the Falcons aspect of it, is, they are a game behind Tampa Bay right now for the NFC South. And they have, like you said, very favorable schedule. Giants and Panthers is two of their last three, also going to Washington. That'll be a more difficult matchup for them. Battle between the 2023 Heisman Trophy winner and the guy who actually deserved to win the 2023 Heisman Trophy, if you ask me. But anyway, they're chasing Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay's last three games are in Dallas, hosting Carolina, and hosting New Orleans. And so, I mean, there's a likely possibility that the Falcons win out and still don't catch the Bucks. But I'm not going to rule out what Atlanta could do, or what Tampa Bay really could do. The other thing is the Falcons still have, I mean, it's barely a chance, but it is a chance for that wild card spot, that last wild card spot in the NFC. right now, looking at the NFC playoff picture, you have the Commanders at 7, the Seahawks at 8, the Falcons at 9. Or, if because technically the Rams have tiebreaker over the Seahawks right now, but if they didn't, the Rams would then be at 8, either way. So I think, man, the Falcons, like, obviously they have to win out, but I think that game against the Commanders could actually mean a lot more than we might expect, because of that, because the Rams and the Seahawks are playing week 18. 18? Yeah, they're 18 now.
I want to go to that game. I was looking at tickets for that game just the other day, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Because it's in LA, and so it's just
Sure.
an hour drive for me. But
Yeah.
if the Seahawks win this week, because they have a pretty difficult game this week.
They're hosting Minnesota this week.
If they beat Minnesota this week, I'm going to go to that game. I'm going to go to the Week 18 game. But
Yeah.
I don't think if Seattle doesn't beat Minnesota this week, I just don't think they have a shot to make the playoffs / win the division.
Right.
At least win the division. But
Well,
if they beat Minnesota, check back with me, fans, because I'm going to that Seattle-LA game. I was looking at tickets. They're cheap, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to, for whatever reason, nobody wants to see a game in SoFi Stadium. It's weird.
It's such a nice stadium. I've been there. It's such a nice stadium. But
So-
per ticket, it's like $75 a ticket before fees and stuff. But
That's not bad for an NFL game.
It's not at all. For an NFL game?
Yeah. Dang.
Yeah.
But anyway, looking at the Seahawks and Rams schedule, now that we're kind of talking about it, the Seahawks host the Vikings, go to Chicago, and then go to LA as their last 3 games. The Rams go to the Jets, host the Cardinals, and then host the Seahawks. And so basically, if you're a Falcons fan, you're hoping, 1, you win out, 2, that either both the Seahawks and the Rams lose a game before they play each other, because that's the only way that you're gonna jump whoever the loser of that game is. And then, I mean, what the heck? Let's look at Washington's remaining 3 games. They're hosting the Eagles, hosting the Falcons, and going to Dallas. So there's a very real possibility that if the Falcons beat them, then they'll both end the season at 7 losses. And so it could be interesting. Again, Atlanta is in a position where it's like, we still have a chance, but we need a lot of other people to do a lot of other things. We don't just control our own destiny like, some of these other teams do. I mean, I'm thinking about like the Packers, right? Like, the Packers win and they're in basically at this point. Same thing again. The Bucks control their destiny. They win out. They win the South. So the Falcons need a little bit of help, but also wanted to kind of flip this conversation from just the Falcons to talking about other instances of teams going and getting veterans, whether it's through trade or free agency, that are older, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I think the reason, Nick, that we've seen such an uptick in these lately is because of how recently the Buccaneers got Tom Brady and it worked. And so I think that's why we're seeing a ton of these happening more and more frequently. But it's not the only example of this. I mean, this has happened before. Thinking back, Peyton Manning going to the Broncos, the Redskins, now the Commanders, trading for Donovan McNabb. Other examples too, Joe Montana going to the Chiefs. So like it's not like this is just a new phenomenon. But Nick, what's sort of your thoughts, having had the sample size that we have over these last few years? What's sort of your thoughts about, just in general, and then we'll talk about some specific players, about this, about teams that's like, what, we need a QB. This other team is like, hey, we're done with this guy, but we want him, right?
So I I kind of like the old quarterbacks kind of moving around teams kind of trend we've seen the last couple of years with like Brady, who you mentioned. I feel like Brady's Tampa Bay arc is a really memorable part of his career now, where he spent so much time in New England, but like Tampa Bay, those last 3 years, like they still, because they won a Super Bowl, like still very fresh in my mind, I feel like. But one of the things that just pops for me for these old QBs is that I really, really think old QBs operate much better when they're entering situations with established head coaches.
Mm.
Where specifically, like, say, for example, somebody who we've seen this twice in the last few years, we saw Russell Wilson go from the Seahawks with Pete Carroll, and he jumped to a Broncos team with Nathaniel Hackett, and it was a disaster. And then he was with Sean Payton for a year, and it was better. And then he's with established Mike Tomlin, joining a team and a culture that's set, and then it kind of shakes out to be better. Or a Matt Stafford joining the Rams. The Rams and Sean McVay, established, have been to a Super Bowl, have leaders on that team, and Andrew Whitworth and Aaron Donald. I just feel like there are many, many instances now that we've seen quarterback join team, but it's like, hey, this is a rookie head coach. Hey, this is a young head coach that like us, the fans, don't have a whole lot of respect for. And I feel like a quarterback joining a place that there's not established leadership, it makes it a kind of tougher carry. And so I feel like when you see a great head coach get a good older quarterback, you get much better results than a head coach get an older quarterback. So that's just, I feel like, a huge piece of the pie that people don't acknowledge as much.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, when a new head coach that is still trying to win the locker room over, still trying to establish a culture there, and you're bringing in a guy that he's like, listen, I've been around NFL locker rooms for the last 15 years. Like, what do you want from me? And the head coach is like, honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing. It's a lot harder for, like you talked about, that quarterback to really step in there and lead. I think it's interesting. You talked about Russell Wilson, and we mentioned him earlier with how different that is from Atlanta, because Denver did trade for him and gave up a lot of trade capital for him. But I think you need to look at Russell Wilson both going to the Broncos and Russell Wilson going to the Steelers, and think about how different that is, not just the coaching, but also just like financially how different that is, right? If the Falcons bring in Kirk Cousins, if the Jets bring in Aaron Rodgers, if the Colts bring in, Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan, and those are a little different because they didn't marry themselves to those guys. They did bring them in just for 1 year just to sort of see. But, thinking about those, like if you bring that guy in and you're paying him the veterans minimum, right? Like the Steelers are paying Russell Wilson. That is very, very different than bringing him in and tying up, probably near 25% of or more of your salary cap into that guy, right? And just how vastly different I think we would look at Kirk Cousins in Atlanta if they brought him in on a 1-year deal and they were paying him, $8 million for 1 year. And it's like, hey, we got to this point. It's just like, yeah, it's not working. Because then we're looking at it, we're like, he's a bridge guy, right? He came in, you brought him in to play that role until you're ready to put Michael Penix in, and you didn't spend that much. And so, cool, makes a lot of sense. But when you bring a guy in, he signs a deal for 180 some million dollars over 4 years. That's really, really different to look at and say, like, no, this wasn't a mistake. And so I think we need to be looking a lot more at, what the Steelers did with Russell Wilson than what some of these other teams are doing when they bring in these established veterans, just because, again, like, how much skin are you putting in the game? For the Broncos getting Russell Wilson, they just like put their entire lives on the line with that. With Atlanta getting Kirk Cousins, not as much because there wasn't a ton of draft cap. There was no draft capital, but still, you're signing off a lot of yourself for this, because I mean I think about the Falcons moving forward, and let's say it works with Michael Penix Jr., but then you're at a point that you have Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and Drake London, and you have to pay them, and you're like, well, shoot, we still have Kirk Cousins on our books, right? And then you finally get off of Kirk Cousins, but instead of having a little reprieve of having to pay a quarterback, Michael Penix Jr. is then, you're picking up his fifth-year option, and a year later you're signing him to a lucrative deal as well. And so, Nick, sort of, what do you think, about that? About how much we're paying these guys when we bring them in. You said you like it. You like the sort of what that does for the league a little bit, and how fun that is. But there's got to be some limits, right?
Sure. I 100% get that. I think that what I'm kind of looking at with it too is like we had so many first-round rookie quarterbacks this year, 6 of them, and I feel like we could see a line of demarcation in terms of situation that's super interesting, where Caleb Williams, you're going to start him. You're not bringing him off the bench. You don't have a person in front of him. And then you got Jane Daniels. He was going to start, period, for Washington. They didn't have any other plan as far as Washington being like putting in any other QB in front of him. It was like, we're putting in Jaden, period. And then you had the kind of vague bit of like, hey, New England, we kind of want to start Jacoby Brissett. We know that May is better. We know that he's more talented, but May might get killed behind this offensive line. We want to do this, but we're going to start who's basically a backup. Mm-hmm. And that point on, it's all, hey, we kind of have this secondary plan until you get to Bo Nix, where you have Michael Penix and the Falcons with Kirk Cousins. You have J.J. McCarthy and Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold kind of taking that like secondary. You can start him, and I don't really remember what the plan was with McCarthy, whether they wanted to start McCarthy or start Darnold and then bring McCarthy in afterward off the bench. And then you get to Bo Nix, where the Broncos were just screwed as far as any kind of backup situation because the financials, because the whole Russ situation. So they just said, we are not bringing in any other quarterback outside of a rookie that costs any big amount of money because our financials are screwed right now. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like it got to that line of like vague Drake May weirdness, and then Bo Nix and Sean Payton just needing to like run out the string with that. But for me, I feel like Penix, it probably would have made more sense retrospectively for him to be in a Raiders kind of situation, where I think that if the Falcons had had Gardner Minshew instead of Kirk Cousins, you start Gardner Minshew for 6 games and be like, okay, Penix, go play out there. And you're only paying Gardner Minshew $13 million or whatever, and you're not super committed to him. Or you have Penix if he had been drafted by the Raiders, and then you have Gardner Minshew there and you just play it out there. But I feel like because they invested such an insane amount for multiple years with Kirk, that it just made it, I get that it was an insurance policy basically of like, hey, we're doing this because if one of them sucks, we got the other one. But like, hey, you just used a really valuable asset on Kirk and all that money, and a really valuable asset on Michael Penix in all that draft capital in terms of a number 8 pick.
Right.
And so a lot of word salad there, but that's kind of my thoughts generally about it, about rookies specifically with it.
Yeah. And so the thing that I always think about when it comes to getting a rookie quarterback, this is always my first thought, is I think about Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. And I think about how that worked. One, he did not play for most of his rookie year. Now, the reason that worked, and I think more teams need to be thinking about this. I think the Steelers needed to have more foresight about this when they were getting to the end of Ben, right? You have an established coach. You have an established quarterback that has been there, and your team is being successful with him. A year before or 2 years before, you're like, okay, it's really time to move on. That's when you go get the quarterback. So instead of him, sitting and seeing the situation right for a year, but you're bringing in Mitchell Trubisky also, is like, this is going to be the bridge guy while you sit under him. It's like, well, he has nothing to learn from Mitchell Trubisky because Trubisky is also learning everything about being a Steeler quarterback, like, and I think there are other teams like this. I love Jared Goff. I'm glad that the Lions have him. I do think, despite what apparently everybody online seems to think, I do think that he is a difference-making quarterback, not a quarterback that is just has no impact on the game whatsoever. But when the Lions are like, you know what, it's time to move on, draft a guy while you still have Goff for a year or two, right? And give that guy the chance to learn from Jared Goff, an established veteran, because that's the other thing, like you want to bring in a guy to mentor your quarterback who had success and was an established quarterback in the NFL, not a guy that, like, yeah, he has NFL experience, but not great NFL experience, right? And so we see too much of quarterbacks getting thrust into situations too early, rookie quarterbacks getting thrust into situations too early, and too many times also you have quarterbacks that were great players in college because of the status of college football with the playoff, with the transfer portal. Colleges are trying to create teams for a year, not trying to create programs where they truly develop a quarterback. Dylan Gabriel is great. He is playing for his third team that he, during his college career this year, right? And I'm sure he has learned and grown and improved over his 6 years in college football. But also, I don't think Oregon brought him in and is like, hey, we're developing you to make you a better quarterback. They brought him in because they're like, you're already good enough to play college football. And so the tools that you already have, we need you to be able to do that. And here we are in the number one team in the country. Right. And so I think more teams need to have more patience with their rookie quarterbacks, but that doesn't mean put them out there and, like the Colts with Anthony Richardson, put him out there and just keep letting him just like mess up and mess up and mess up. But bring a quarterback in a little earlier than you actually want to make that transition to a new quarterback, like the Packers have done very, very well in the history of their franchise.
Maybe too well. Maybe too well.
Right. Maybe too well, but still you look at them and they have had 3 franchise quarterbacks in a row without having a gap or a break of like, sort of, what are we doing here? The Patriots had Tom Brady for a while. They've got Drake May now. Like, Patriots fans like to forget the Cam Newton year and the Bailey Zappi and Mac Jones years, right? Like, and so I think that's something, that's a direction that teams need to go in more, of just having a little bit more patience. And I get that it's hard. I get the owners want to win. I get the GMs want to win. But like, if you look at the Lions, Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes signed 6-year deals when they first took over, right? 6 years. That is longer than most, new head coaches and GMs do. But it was because the Lions were like, you know what? We're tired of this revolving door. We're going to give you guys a chance to really establish something, really make this your own, really, do what you got to do. And here we are right now that the Lions are 12-2, despite being decimated with injuries, and currently have the 1 seed in the NFC. And so after an NFC championship game berth last year. And, I think like you have that, and you have what the Packers have done with, Aaron Rodgers and then Jordan Love. And you have the dichotomy of that with the Bears, who it's like, we have a sucky coach, and we're going to give him 1 more year and bring in a rookie quarterback. And we know he's a deadbeat coach. And so we're going to fire him, keep the same GM, and bring in a new head coach. And then right before that rookie quarterback would be getting a new deal, we're going to bring in a new GM, and that new GM wants to bring in their own quarterback anyway. And it's just this cycle of trash, right? And so like, I'm just asking, like, when are teams going to learn and realize like these patterns of things that work and patterns of things that don't work? And I get that that's way too black and white for what it really is, but there has to be an aspect of that, right?
Mm-hmm. I hear you there, Jack. I feel like the kind of Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes model that you kind of brought up for a minute there. For me, it kind of, the NBA parallel that pops to mind for me is like, say, for example, somebody like a Mike Conley or like a Kyle Lowry, like an older point guard who knows how to play the right way, knows how to establish a culture, knows how to go to work every day, work hard, be the adult in the room kind of thing. That's the kind of Alex Smith kind of guy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Where like Chris Paul currently on the Spurs. Chris Paul is nowhere near his peak, nowhere near the player he once was. But the thing is, in this equivalent, if like Victor Wembanyama is like year 1 or 2 Megatron, it's like, hey, even with year 1 or 2 Megatron, it's like, hey, old ass Alex Smith throwing the ball up to him, you're gonna see Wemby or Megatron, whichever you'd want to follow in this parallel, like you'd see crazy plays because it's somebody who knows how to throw the ball on time and know how to run an offense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like to have that old veteran knows how to run a system, establish a culture kind of guy, it's super critical and just really awesome for teams to have that glue guy, that veteran leadership. And I think that's super critical as far as to have that when you're developing a young kid, where, as you said with the Mahomes, I feel like there are many, many dudes where even like Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson. Joe Flacco was there Lamar Jackson's rookie year, and he started half the year. Like Joe Flacco's not a great quarterback by any means, but like he showed up. He was able to run a system. He did throw too many interceptions, and he wasn't an elite quarterback by any stretch. But that's a veteran who knew how to do his job. And I'm sure even that time, allowing Lamar to develop allowed him to pop onto the scene late his rookie year and his second year when he won MVP. Like that really matters, to have a little bit of a mentor, a little bit of, hey, look at what they're doing and kind of mirror them, kind of be able to just watch and learn. You don't even need to hear what they're saying. You don't even need to be told exactly what to do, but to just be around a professional,
Right.
I think so critical, as you were saying.
And that situation, similar to the Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes situation, Joe Flacco was established in that locker room. John Harbaugh was established in that locker room, right? Like Lamar Jackson came in and watched behind Joe Flacco, and Joe Flacco already had control of that team in that situation and was able to. It wasn't like, yeah, I'm a veteran that can show you how a veteran, trains and is a quarterback in the NFL. But he's like, hey, I'm a veteran that can show you how to lead an NFL locker room and to lead an offense and be an established quarterback in the NFL. It's the same thing with Alex Smith in Kansas City before Patrick Mahomes. Alex Smith had been there. Andy Reid had been there. They had built that rapport with one another and with the team and with the locker room. And so that's I think that's so important. I think if in 2019, 2020, the Steelers had drafted a quarterback, even though we have Big Ben and he still has a little bit of gas left in him, I think that now obviously the Steelers are in a great situation quarterback wise in terms of quarterback play, but also, you would know better than I do. What is the future at the quarterback position for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? So what do you do there? I think it's important.
I have the exact scenario. I have lived in this theoretical in my mind for a number of years now as far as what it looks like. The year's 2019. It's week 2. Big Ben just annihilated his elbow after playing. He played New England and then played the Seahawks in Seattle. Absolutely annihilated his elbow. It seems like his career is just over. That's what it seemed like. Like this dude is old. And he just ruined his elbow and his throwing arm. That's terrible. The Steelers' offense and defense the first 2 weeks looked awful. It looked really terrible even on defense. New England, who didn't look great 2018 on offense, won the Super Bowl still 13-3, but their offense didn't look great. And their offense was worse in 2019. Lit up the Steelers' defense. Steelers' defense, terrible. And then Seattle wasn't a great team that year either. Steelers defense looked terrible. Steelers on both sides of the ball look awful. A week or two later, the Steelers make a trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick, trading a number 1 first-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick from the Dolphins. That trade, the Steelers defense absolutely clamped up and became an elite unit with Minkah Fitzpatrick locking down the back end. and their defense was, in my opinion, the best in the league that year. And so I was just stoked that the defense was good that year, but the Steelers then didn't have a first round pick in that draft.
Right.
If the Steelers, though, don't trade away Minka Fitzpatrick, their defense never comes together. That offense might have been one of the most putrid offenses I had ever seen. That was an insanely awful offense. If the Steelers' offense is that awful and their defense doesn't get it together, they could have a top 5-ish pick. Number 6 pick that year, Justin Herbert. I just feel like the Steelers winning 8 games, if they had won 5 instead and not decided to like try and run it out with that defense, you're talking about, okay, they don't trade away that pick for Minka. Okay, they never get Minka, but they get Justin Herbert to sit behind Big Ben for a year and then take over a year later. That I feel like would have been an amazing way to transition out of the Big Ben era.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I feel like teams can be very beholden to, okay, aging superstar, okay, they're aging. Huge injury. What do we now do about this? Okay, let's still try and figure it out after this huge injury late in their career. Like Aaron Rodgers is on the Jets, tears his Achilles, and the Jets are like, we'll still figure it out and we'll play a year with Aaron Rodgers and like we'll still kind of figure it out. It's like, wait a second. This dude was on the downslope his last year in Green Bay and then annihilates his Achilles 4 plays into the season. And you're just like, well, we'll ride it out with him. Like, who needs a backup quarterback situation? Who needs any sort of other quarterback plan? And I think the ability to be beholden to an aging, terrible injury happens late in their career superstar. Even Kirk Cousins, his Achilles tear, and deciding to be like, well, we haven't seen him play football since he tore his Achilles, but we're going to pay him a ton of money and figure it out. At least Atlanta drafted Penix. But if I'm an NFL team, I don't know that I'm ever paying a 35-plus-year-old who just had a major, major injury.
Right.
I can't name a quarterback who had a major, major injury at 35 and then after that played like a superstar. I think the only one on our little list we kind of compiled would be maybe Peyton Manning. I don't know quite how old he was when he left the Colts, but he's kind of around that 34, 35.
Yeah.
But, man, I feel like the late career terrible injury, like Brett Favre with his, what was it, his shoulder or his elbow on the Jets. He still had 1 good year left on the Vikings. But these late career injuries just get magnified on these old bodies, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you can look at examples even where a player doesn't get hurt that like this is still an issue. I mean, look at the Saints right now, right? Like they had no plan, no direction after Drew Brees. And, you know, they paid Derek Carr. It hasn't worked out. But even in the middle without, before that, it was like still like, what are we doing? And I understand, quarterbacks, everyone talks about how big divas wide receivers are, and they are, trust me, but quarterbacks can be divas too. And I get that. But I mean, I look at the situation and, I think, using the Saints, for example, like Drew Brees is a great guy and was a very professional throughout his entire career. And I am 100% positive that like he would have been like, fine, I get it. If the Saints decided to do that, yeah, Aaron Rodgers, not the same way. Right. But still, like, I mean, and I went back and I looked at the 2021 NFL draft, right? Because, like you said, even if the Steelers make that trade, right, they're drafting
2020 draft, not 2020.
Right. That's what I'm saying. They make that trade. They still get Minka. They don't have a pick in the 2020 draft. Yeah. Even then going to 2021, right? Like you took Najee Harris at 24. People don't.
Darisaw went 1 pick ahead of him. I wanted Darisaw, the offensive tackle, so bad.
Well,
1 pick ahead.
But the other thing, there were a lot of trades that happened in that draft. I mean, that was the one where the Niners traded all the way up to get Trey Lance.
Three.
There was
Jalen Hurts is in the second round, I believe.
right.
No,
So like imagine
2020 was good.
instead of drafting Najee Harris, you draft you draft a quarterback, right? You take a quarterback, or you trade up. Maybe even you trade up and then you get Justin Fields right from the get-go, right? Like
Maybe
there's
so.
just I think teams I think there's sort of this like, pattern and like formula of like you need a quarterback, but you're not in the top 10, and so you don't draft a quarterback. Or you could use a quarterback, but you're not in the top 10, so you don't draft a quarterback, right? And like go get a guy. That's just sort of that's just sort of how I see it. Like I hope that the Lions, despite needing to at some point have a succession plan for Jared Goff, are still competing in the NFC. I would still love for them to go get a quarterback. I mean, the Ravens did it. They trade back into the first round to get Lamar Jackson. There's examples of this. So I digress, but I think we just need to. I think the NFL needs to sort of realize, like, all right, instead of we can't treat our quarterbacks the way we treat our running backs, where we run them into a ground and then we go draft a new one. It is okay. Our quarterback is almost run into the ground. We need to figure out what we're going to do from here. Even if we're like, he's not really running to the ground right now, but we know there's only 2 years left, 1 year left. Like, okay, what do we do? So, yeah. So this was fun talking quarterbacks a little bit, and talking old dudes. We put together like a list of quarterbacks like as examples of this, and we didn't even get to them. Maybe we'll just spew a few names out. Donovan McNabb is one of them. Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. Kurt Warner, Joe Montana going from the Niners to the Chiefs at the end of his career.
Favre on the Jets.
Favre on the Jets, and then the Vikings. That's probably the best comparison then to Wilson on the Broncos and then on the Steelers the next year or 2 years later. But anyway, y'all, thanks so much for watching and for listening to us. Just two guys talking football, talking sports like we love to do. So enjoy the rest of your day. We'll probably do one more episode before Christmas, but if not, Merry Christmas and happy holidays to everybody.